beneath the tranquil, sunlit waters of the Mediterranean Sea of magnificent, entirely forgotten empires. Over 3,000 years ago, this very vessel represented the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, engineering, and maritime navigation. It was a vital, pulsing artery of an incredibly advanced, hyper-globalized world, stretching from Cyprus to Egypt and deep into Anatolia. For centuries, traditional historians have painted a terrifying, strictly linear picture of the late Bronze Age collapse. Welcome back, truth seekers. It is incredibly easy to get lost in those thrilling, cinematic myths of unstoppable, fierce ancient invasions. The ancient Egyptian reliefs at Medinet Habu explicitly blamed mysterious, heavily armed marauders known only as the Sea Peoples for burning the world to ashes. They blamed an external boogeyman. But I need you to pay very close attention to this modern geological and atmospheric data. Modern scientific research has completely overturned this simplistic linear narrative. The late Bronze Age was an incredibly complex, highly interdependent economic network. The reality is much darker, vastly more complicated, and terrifyingly closer to our own modern world. The Sea Peoples were not the root cause. They were desperate, starving climate refugees, fleeing a fragile, hyper-globalized system that had already completely shattered from the inside out. Imagine a sprawling landscape overflowing with profound agricultural wealth. A Mediterranean paradise where endless olive groves fueled the highly centralized economies of legendary palace states. These weren't simple farming villages. The Mycenaean and Hittite empires operated strict, top-down command economies. Everything was meticulously tracked, taxed, and redistributed by the palace elites. But then, a slow-moving, entirely invisible killer begins to suffocate the land. The vital, seasonal rains simply stop. Lush, productive valleys turn to dead dust. We aren't guessing about this weather shift. We have the exact, microscopic forensic climate record. The undeniable truth of this collapse wasn't written in human texts. By extracting deep sediment cores from ancient lakes, scientists discovered that between 1250 and 1100 BC, annual rainfall plummeted by an astonishing 100 to 200 millimeters. Think about what that specific mathematical deficit means for a rigidly structured society. A drop that severe doesn't just cause a bad harvest, it permanently destroys entire economies. The palynological record shows a catastrophic, sudden, and irreversible drop in olea, or olive tree pollen, across the entire eastern Mediterranean basin. This specific crop was the absolute lifeblood of their wealth. Olives were the ultimate cash crop of the Bronze Age palace economies, traded like liquid gold. Without the massive surplus of olive oil to trade for foreign metals, the royal treasuries quickly bled entirely dry. The economic engine simply seized up. To corroborate the pollen data, researchers ventured deep underground. Inside the Mavri Trypa Cave in Greece, scientists targeted the slow-growing stalagmites for advanced isotopic testing. They utilized uranium-thorium radiometric dating. By measuring the precise radioactive decay of trace elements trapped within the calcium carbonate layers of the cave formations. This advanced radiometric dating gave us a terrifyingly clear, undeniable timeline, accurate to within a margin of just 26 years. It confirmed a multi-generational megadrought near Pylos. Simultaneously, environmental data recovered from Hala Sultan Tekke in Cyprus proved that sea surface temperatures dropped significantly, permanently disrupting the essential rain-bringing storm tracks. It was a true, unavoidable death from the sky. Climate forcing destroyed the fundamental agricultural baseline, leaving the glittering palaces entirely unfunded and utterly vulnerable. But as the crops failed and the treasuries emptied, another distinct terror supposedly struck from below. The great stone fortresses of the Mediterranean began to dynamically tremble and heavily shift. For years, prominent geophysicists promoted a deeply concerning, highly disruptive hypothesis: an earthquake storm, a devastating sequence of seismic ruptures tearing across the entire ancient world. Seismologist Amos Nur famously argued that a series of massive 6.5 magnitude earthquakes ripping sequentially along fault lines over 50 years literally flattened these civilizations. It sounds like the perfect apocalyptic cinematic scenario. But rigorous modern science, specifically the Heracles project led by Klaus G. Hinzen, definitively and permanently debunked this myth. When geologists and seismologists actually modeled the rock formations beneath these specific ruins, they found a glaring, impossible contradiction in the earthquake storm theory. The magnificent palaces were built on solid, rigid limestone outcrops. Limestone experiences very low topographic amplification during a tectonic earthquake event. If an earthquake storm had truly ravaged these cities, the elite palaces would have easily survived. Instead, the softer, alluvial soils of the lower cities should have liquefied. This process of liquefaction should have instantly collapsed the fragile homes of the commoners, while the massive, heavily engineered cyclopean walls of the kings remained perfectly safe. Yet, the archaeological burn layers tell the exact opposite, highly disturbing story. The lower, vulnerable cities were largely left completely untouched by the fires. The total destruction, the massive, superheated conflagrations, were strictly confined to the royal treasuries, the elite living quarters, and the heavily guarded administrative archives. Earthquakes do not selectively target only the exceedingly rich, and they certainly don't start localized, targeted fires exclusively in the tax-collecting administrative centers of the empire. The agonizing truth is far more human and far more grounded. The destruction wasn't geological, it was an intense, desperate societal shift born from absolute grinding starvation. When the climate failed and the food vanished, the sacred, theological, and social contract between the supposedly divine kings and the starving peasants was forcefully dissolved. While the inland empires systematically burned from violent internal peasant revolts, the true, crippling horror of this collapse was felt on the bustling coasts. The coasts were the heart of the international system, and it was here that the incredibly complex, hyper-specialized global supply chains finally, catastrophically snapped. In his final, terrifying days, King Amurapi of Ugarit sat in total darkness, frantically writing emergency dispatches as the unmistakable sounds of mass slaughter echoed outside his walls. To truly understand his sheer, paralyzing panic, we have to look back at the Uluburun shipwreck we saw earlier. It sank around 1320 BC, carrying something incredibly specific. The ship was carrying exactly 10 tons of pure copper ingots and exactly 1 ton of raw tin. This wasn't a random, assorted mercantile cargo. It was a highly precise, pre-calculated metallurgical recipe. 10 parts copper to 1 part tin creates weapon-grade bronze. Lead isotope analysis proved the copper came from the Apliki mines in Cyprus. But the tin? The isotopic signature suggests this incredibly rare element was hauled from Mushistan in Uzbekistan, or incredibly, all the way from the distant, rainy shores of Cornwall, England. Think about the profound vulnerability of a massive global system that relies on an unsecured, 3,000-mile supply chain just to forge a single, functional bronze sword. When the climate shifted and the local crops completely failed, this hyper-specialized, highly vulnerable network instantly froze. Tablet RS 20.212 reveals the great king of the mighty Hittite Empire practically begging. The Hittite king demanded an emergency ship to transport 2,000 kor of grain from Mukis to the port of Ura, explicitly stating it was a matter of life and death. The most powerful land empire on earth was suddenly, unexpectedly starving to death. They had to send their elite armies and navies entirely away just to forcibly secure basic food shipments. which leads us to the final fatal blow of the Bronze Age. In tablet RS 18.147, King Amurapi sends a terrified, deeply fatalistic message to the king of Alashia in Cyprus. Amurapi wrote that his royal troops were deployed far away in Hittite lands, his navy anchored distantly in Lucca. His massive, incredibly wealthy city was left completely defenseless. He wrote, "Behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." Just 7 enemy ships destroyed the richest trading hub on Earth. A magnificent, interconnected civilization that took thousands of years to build was wiped out, not by a legendary mythical evil, but by a cascading, unavoidable systems failure. The dominoes fell with mathematical precision. When the climate changed, the crops died. When the crops died, the starving peasants violently burned the tax-collecting administrative palaces to the ground. Without the centralized palaces to fund expeditions, the international trade of copper and tin immediately ceased. Without bronze, there were no weapons. And without weapons, the coastal cities were completely slaughtered. The infamous, terrifying sea peoples weren't a massive, highly coordinated alien invasion force. They were simply the starving, desperate survivors of this systemic collapse, violently looking for a new home. The Late Bronze Age was a hyper-globalized, deeply interconnected world that fundamentally believed it was simply too big to fail. As we look at our own fragile, hyper-connected supply chains today, we would do well to remember their terrible fate.